Hi everyone, I hope you're doing well. So for this drawing, um, I am using three different colors of colored pencil, actually four, but you're welcome to just choose three. If you want to bring in a fourth, that's great. But we're really thinking about how we can use a limited palette of colored pencil and use each subsequent color in order to slowly build the image from general to specific. So we're really kind of starting with gesture, and then with each layer, we're really trying to hone the drawing little by little, while also starting to think about getting from the most general aspects of gesture of how the body is sitting in space, the most basic anatomy of like those 8 parts of the body, and slowly getting to some smaller details like maybe there are some of those larger shapes that have a third line kind of going through them. Maybe the torso has an indication of the spine. Maybe the knee has a kneecap within it. Maybe there's moments in each part of the form where light is wrapping around the form, and you can start to use each subsequent layer of color and colored pencil in order to further describe detail as you go along. But this way, as usual, working from general to specific is going to really save you a lot of headaches later on because you're able to really get a solid framework of how the figure is going to sit within your overall composition, but also the most basic, most important structural aspects of the proportions and the anatomy. And then we can slowly hone detail and start to think about light and shadow. So I've chosen for this drawing a limited palette of these 4 colors. So when choosing a color palette, I recommend thinking about having a balance of warm and cool. So for me, given my image, I really thought it was important to create a distinction between the warmth of the human form in the environment and the coolness of the space surrounding them. So I have 3 colors here that are kind of on the cooler side. 2 greens. One is like a kind of rich forest green. It's called Vert Ocean. And then I also have this pastel pencil. I got it from Recreative Denver for like $1. And these are fantastic. You can use Prismacolor pencils hand in hand with pastel pencils, or you can just get all of one kind, see what works for you. But I'm actually using all 4 of these colors for every part of the image. It's just I'm putting more of an emphasis on the warm tones in the figure and more of an emphasis on the green tones in the environment. That being said, I'm using the greens as my shadow colors for the figure, and I'm using my orange tone in order to pull out some warmth from like the moss surrounding the figure. So some big questions that we're really grappling with here in this demonstration is how can we have a focus on accurate representation of the figure, effectively capturing anatomy, capturing the story of the pose through gesture, while also being thoughtful about the relationship between the figure and their environment. I know that a lot of y'all really want to be figurative painters or artists. Maybe you want to be comic artists or illustrators. Maybe you want to be animators. And one thing that's going to really set you aside in your field is if you have a really strong understanding of how to draw the human form. But if you also are able to draw environments and think about the overall context, that's something that a lot of character designers sometimes are missing, is the ability to really consider the context of how the overall lighting of the environment and the relationship between the figure and the ground or the person and their environment are so crucial to telling a story in a way that is compelling and that feels real. So through this project, I really encourage y'all to think about how integrating the human form into a larger environment can help you capture a sense of a deeper relationship between these two things, and also how it can help you tell a story in general. If you've ever written a story, you probably know that setting is crucial and can help you come up with so many details that help to create a rich sense of story. So let's get into it. So this is the image that I've chosen for my reference image, and I found it on Line of Action. If you kind of click through a ton of different poses and models, there are a lot of models that are depicted engaged in their environment in some interesting way. You're more than welcome to find a reference image elsewhere, as long as it is from a reputable figure drawing site. You're also more than welcome to make your own reference image. So maybe you want to, take a really interesting self-portrait involved in engaging in your environment in some way. Keep in mind that your environment doesn't need to be outside. You can also think about interior space as the place that you want to engage with. But I chose this image because I just felt like when I was scrolling through images, this one spoke to me on a personal level, because this gesture of how the figure is kind of, it feels like they're both like kind of holding the earth and being held by it, felt like a gesture that that I can relate to. It seems like there's kind of like an intimacy happening between this figure and their environment. I also think that the crouched phase, sort of the crouched pose of this figure, conveys this sense of like vulnerability. There's also this like sense of like embrace happening. And I think it's just really beautiful. I also think that the foreshortening in this pose will be a fun challenge for me. So when you're choosing your own reference image, I really encourage you to think about what is a challenge for you. What's an image that has an interesting sense of lighting? So I feel like the light source is really clear on this figure, and I love how the lighting feels so integrated between the figure and the environment. I also encourage you to just think about, like, does this pose or this model speak to me in some personal way, and tells a story that you feel like you can relate to in some way, or a story that you want to tell. So it's always, I think, important to ask yourself the question of like, why am I drawn to this? A lot of the time we're drawn to things intuitively, but the more we kind of ask ourselves why, the more we can really kind of start to unpack who we are as an artist and the things that we care about deeply. So time to get drawing. So I'm working on a piece of toned watercolor paper, and starting with my lightest color, which is my orange, and working with a sharpened but very loose and light application of my colored pencil. So I'm using very little pressure at first in order to build up the most important structural gestures in the figure as well as in the environment surrounding them. Working the whole image generally can help you make sure that things don't feel disconnected later on. So I'm starting to build up a bit more pressure with my line as I'm moving from the most general, sometimes inaccurate lines into some more specific lines that I can be sure are accurate. I'm also starting to really think about how I'm using line to indicate shadow. So in thinking about the economy of line, the lit up part of the body shouldn't have a hard line on its edge. So I'm being really thoughtful about the lit up sections of the figure's back and legs, and ensuring that I'm not using too hard of a line. I can really kind of think about the soft edge lines and using those for spherical areas like the muscle and fat, and then using kind of sharper lines for abrupt changes in plane, like landmarks, sections where there's a shift in plane on the leg, for instance, and things are going to become much more in shadow. I'm also really thinking about the directionality of my mark, really thinking about using wrapping lines in order to convey a sense of planar changes in how the form is wrapping and moving through space. As I'm working from my lightest, warmest color to some of these darker, cool tones, I'm really thinking about the overall lighting scenario and how light is hitting both the figure and the space around them. The shadow areas right where the figure meets the environment are some of the most important moments in which we feel a sense of weight, where the figure is leaning into this rock and into this moss. So the story is really being told through the distribution of weight. And the way we capture this distribution of weight is through our anatomy, through our gesture. So those first marks in our gesture drawings, those lightest marks, are some of the most important in really figuring out how we're telling a story through the weight and through the relationship between this figure and their environment. I can't wait to see how y'all express some deep poetic concepts through your use of gesture and story in your figure drawings. Happy drawing, y'all!